Welcome back. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, together with the National Police Commissioner General Fannie Masemola, will present the quarterly crime statistics today. The report will reveal crimes committed in the fourth quarter of the last financial year. In the previous quarter's data, murder between October as well as December showed a general decrease. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa has acknowledged the ongoing serious challenges South Africa faces in fighting crime. To discuss this, we are now joined by Lizette Lancaster, who is a Crime Hub Manager at the Institute for Security Studies. A very good morning to you, Lizette. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. This briefing to Parliament and later on to members of the media also comes on the back of that meeting between Donald Trump and President Cyril Ramaphosa on Wednesday, where South Africa's violent crime and the nature of South Africa's violent crime was also laid bare by the various commentators during that meeting as well. What should we draw from what was said during that meeting and what we should expect in what Minister Senzo Mchunu as well as General Fannie Masemola will be presenting later on today?
I think South Africans know how we feel about crime and how people experience it in their daily lives. We have a huge robbery problem, and that is evidenced by the number of hijackings, armed robberies in our homes, in our streets, and in our business premises, especially for entrepreneurs. So these are the things that we try and look at in the crime statistics, but the best proxy for measuring our violence is the murder figures. And the good news is we have seen for the past 3 quarters decreases culminating in almost a 10% decrease between October and December last year, but it's still unacceptably high. We're looking at 75 murders on average 76 actually, on average per day in South Africa. So we anticipate that the murder rate should be coming down some more, hopefully, and this is going to be great because that means for 4 quarters in a row we've seen decreases in the murder rate, and that would be the first time since COVID, but we know that that was an artificial sort of reduction because we were all locked up in our homes. Mm-hmm. So it would be the first one since about 2011. So that is encouraging. Unfortunately, we do believe that robberies will still be very high, if not stabilized at those high levels, might still increase. Kidnappings are a huge problem that are still increasing, and so is commercial crimes and certain forms of assaults.
Yeah, and when we look at murder as one of the proxies or indicators of the violent nature of the crime levels in the country, what does the data tell us behind the reasons that would lead to murders as well as attempted murder?
So the biggest reason we are still seeing these high levels of murder and attempted murders is what we call interpersonal crime. It is because of arguments between ourselves, when often fueled by alcohol or drugs, because South Africans are highly frustrated. So it happens in all households across the country, but they are concentrated areas because we know like half of murders happen over weekends. Half of murders also happen in only about 30% of 12% of police station areas, and 20% in only about 34 police stations. So these are highly concentrated. They happen over weekends because it's interpersonal, because we fight. But the second largest reason are these robberies, often armed robberies, like we see on farms, like we see in our homes, in the cities specifically, because that's where it's mostly concentrated. The hijackings that are particularly prevalent in Gauteng, but also happen in other provinces and specifically the cities. So robbery is our big problem.
Yeah. And gang-related violence, to what extent does that contribute to that high murder rate? And I'm also asking this on the back of what Johan Rupert had said during that meeting with Donald Trump, and pointing to John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance. And we know, of course, the Western Cape, it's the only province actually being governed by the Democratic Alliance. But to what extent does gang-related violence also play into these murder rates that we are seeing?
Yes, and those are the ones that come sort of third and fourth, is the intergroup violence. So it could be taxi violence, it could be gang violence. And when we look at the top 30 murder stations, we see that very often they are in gang-ridden areas, such as in the Cape Flats or up here in Gauteng, and even in places like KwaZulu-Natal, and particularly in the Eastern Cape around Nelson Mandela Bay. So gang violence is a particular problem. And just to put it into perspective, Aldrin, we saw in the past 3 quarters, on average, about 300 kids being murdered. It is shocking. These are it was last quarter, 273 kids. Before that, it was 314 and 315 per quarter. That is astounding. And those kids are mostly teenagers that are caught in the crossfire or perpetrating violence in these gang-related areas.
Sure. In 2019, we saw the deployment of the SANDF as an initiative to try and curb gang-related violence. I remember that there was a pushback at the time as well, and some organizations arguing that you can't expect the soldiers to be dealing with crime because they're not necessarily trained to deal in crime. They're trained to actually protect our borders. But what sort of initiatives then should we be seeing to deal with this high level of crime in general, not just leaving it or at the doorstep of a gang-related violence, but in general, what sort of interventions should we be seeing?
We are clearly seeing some interventions that are quite successful. We have seen interventions in the farming communities that have resulted in far fewer deaths in farming communities, of between 9 and 15 per quarter of people on farms and small holdings, for example. So there's great partnerships in the farming communities, if we can talk about that just for a second before I move to the gangs in the cities, that are looking at partnerships, interventions to make sure that farming communities are safer. In the cities, we do see the anti-gang units. We are seeing the serious violent crime units deployed to root out extortion that's often linked to these robbery syndicates and just basic gangsters and thugs in areas, especially in Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. So it is about making sure that these people are taken off the streets. But it's not just about the foot soldiers. It's about network analysis, making sure that we are seeing that the gangs are, that we know who is who in these gangs, and that they are dismantled and permanently dismantled by continued interventions. We are starting to see successes in places like the Western Cape. And of course, in the short term, when you start disrupting these gangs, we've seen high-profile arrests and shootings, for example. But when you start disrupting these gangs, others try and move in on the territories, and it might create more violence in the short term. But these are the only ways we can be able to deal with gang violence. And then, of course, the main issue is the socioeconomic levers we need to pull to create an environment for people in those communities to be employed gainfully and to have food security, so that it's not so easy for young people to join these gangs.
Yeah. In conclusion, we will have a conversation just after the break with Yolisa Makasi from the New South Institute. And they've done a report looking into the age of public servants. And specifically, if we zoom in just quickly on the police officers. With the police officers, what we notice there is that the police officers are getting older and older, so you don't have a lot of young people coming in to come and serve as police officers. And I wonder, with that particular age, with the police officers aging, whether that does have an impact at all on the ability of SAPS to fight to a certain extent. And I guess some people would argue that, but the older the person is, the police officer is, the more experience there is. But I'm not too sure about the agility that is required in fighting crime.
We have seen a freeze on positions for a number of years in the police, but we have now seen quite mass recruitment of 30,000 into the police. So these are often young people that are recruited and trained into the police. So the police are one of the organizations that are able to draw in young people. I mean, they get hundreds of thousands of applications a year. It's about getting the right people into those positions. But where these older people play quite a significant role is in the mentoring of these young people. In office training or in job training is essential. So the other problem with the older people is that we know from employee health and wellness workshop that the minister hosted earlier this year, that the pressure on police officers are quite great. I mean, you can just imagine doing that job every day. So they need support. There are a lot of health concerns with the older police officers because of just the stress and working conditions that they are under. So we need a healthy balance of mentoring and mentors, but also the upskilling of young people coming through the ranks.